Real quick, even before we dive in, I mean, I think most of you know us, but this is Crista, my wife, Crista.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, you spoke this morning. I'm DJ. We've been married 15 years, 5 kids. Trying to think. You want to share about quickly our parenting journey and kind of our life there?
Yeah. So DJ and I were married at the very mature age of 20 years old. And we took a week off of school for our honeymoon, which was really fun to explain to your college professors, what you're doing there. But when we first got married, we were in youth ministry right away together, serving in youth ministry at my father's church in the city of Southeast LA. And we decided, the city of Bell, and we decided that we wanted to have kids pretty early on. But children did not come easy for us. It actually took us 3.5 years to get pregnant with kids. And there's a whole story to how God brought about our firstborn. But the short of it is God made us wait for, it felt like a really long time, unearthed a lot of idolatries and things within our hearts. Primarily my heart actually was the most of the ugliness was coming out of me. But in his grace, we have 5. And so our oldest is 9. Our youngest is 3. When we planted Imago Dei Church, Chloe was 1, and our son was 2 weeks old in a carrier on my chest on our first Sunday. So
we've also walked through, it was wild. I was thinking, as you said, your ugliness had to be uncovered. I was like, yeah, your ugliness needs to be uncovered. Mine's just kind of hanging out on the surface. It doesn't need to be uncovered. It's just there.
No.
And I just, again, in our family life, I'm trying to think of other dynamics just so you know a little bit about us and kind of where we're coming from. So we lead a church. We've had little kids in planting. We've had other little kids within the process. There were 2 miscarriages in the middle there that we walked through. And we live in a 2-bedroom house. So we have 1,000 square feet and our 5 kids. So there you go. All 5 sleep in one room.
There are no secrets in our
house. There
are
no secrets in our home. And our bathroom door doesn't even lock. No. So there's
no space.
There is no space in our house. Real quick, we've been kind of tasked with talking about what was the topic on the slide? It's family,
children,
kids in church. I was just curious. Okay, as we're here, who's present? Are you wanting to be here more because you're thinking about how do I, in terms of life and ministry, following Jesus, like the parenting family side that you're looking to kind of, hey man, here, maybe ask some questions and process that? Or is it, hey, in our church, we're looking for kids ministry, develop, build out, and kind of what are the values and philosophy that shapes that? So who's here kind of like, and maybe it's both, but who's here with kind of more of a bend towards, hey, in my own family or the family that we're looking to have, wanting to think about the philosophy of that, and who's thinking kids ministry? Who's thinking family more? Okay.
And then who's here for church, kids ministry? It could be both. Okay. Cool. So pretty even.
So probably maybe a little weighted family, but both. So we'll talk for a bit, and then we're going to do some Q&A and let that kind of shape a good portion of this. Here's how Crista and I operate in our marriage. I'm going to share some vision, and Krista's going to share practical. Okay? So, because she is smarter than me. All right, so let me just kind of kick us off on this idea of family. I'm borrowing just real briefly from, I just preached a message on parental love for our church. We did a series on relationships. I remember when we were first pregnant with Chloe, our oldest, and walking into a Target, and we were doing a baby registry, and we're so excited to kind of go through this moment. And that excitement really quickly became being over freaking whelmed by how many things there were. We just wanted to get some bottles, and we're standing in front of a whole aisle of bottles, and like not sure which one is going to be the right one that will set up our daughter to succeed. And it's like, man, if we get the wrong bottle, right? If we get the wrong diaper, it's going to cause a rash, and she'll never become an Olympic athlete. Like it's going to set this cycle in motion. And there's all this anxiety. And then if you are a parent, if you're not, let me tell you what's about to happen to you if you become a parent. is there are no shortage of people who will tell you that there is only one bottle. There's only one. In fact, I remember standing in front of the bottles and this woman, unsolicited, we didn't ask her opinion. We weren't looking. She just came up to us and said, everything they tell you about BPA is a lie. And I was like, and then she walked away. And I was like, I've never heard of BPA in my life. I was like, do I need more BPA in my diet? Do I need less? Like what's going on here? So there's all this pressure and anxiety and decision making. And if you're here, it's because you care at some level about like the stewarding, the great responsibility of parenting, or even kids ministries. We're talking about that. Having kids in our midst, like that is a crazy weight and responsibility. And usually what that then kind of like leads us with is an anxiety and a burden. And like, how do we cope with that? And so I want to just look at two scriptures just real quick. These are going to be super brief, but Psalm 127. Oh, you have it. Okay. Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stay awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb are a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. My guess is, if you've heard that psalm, which you've probably heard that psalm, you've probably heard the two parts of that psalm separate. You've probably heard someone say, hey, unless the Lord builds the house, you labor in vain. And you've probably heard someone say, arrows in the hands, children of the, what is it? Yeah, blessed is the man who fills his quiver with arrows of children or whatever. And sorry, just butchering the text. But those two passages, it's one passage, it's one song. Those two things are actually, those ideas are linked. I know, Crista, that was something that God really ministered to you. And if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading my Bible one day and I was reading Psalm 127 and I was like, those are together? And I thought, like whoever wrote this psalm knew that raising kids is really hard. Because it's just that segue of like, unless the Lord builds the house, the workers labor in vain. It's like, I feel like every effort I do as a parent, it feels like it's in vain. Like, is this even working? I'm tired. I don't see the fruit. My kids still fight. Like, oh Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. And just, and then it's like, no, but children are a heritage. Just that encouragement of remember that they are a gift from the Lord. They are arrows to be sent out into the world. And so I just love that this is the same psalm. Because I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so this idea that, hey, we are partnering with God. God is at work in our midst, and that we are seeking his grace, his power, as we are leading our families and in our churches. And so then as we're walking in his heart and his way, here's just kind of the second piece of vision. And what I would offer you is the heart of parental love is joy that leaves a blessing. The heart of parental love is joy that leaves a blessing. And this just comes from the book of Proverbs, which Proverbs is a parenting book. If you didn't know that, Proverbs is a parenting book. The first 9 chapters of Proverbs are father and mother addressing their kids, giving them a way to live. And then the last bit of Proverbs 31, it reflects back on Proverbs about his mother, right? And that's where you get Proverbs 31 woman is him reflecting back on his mom. It's like that whole thing is coming into, it's a parenting book. So if you parent, just read Proverbs and we can just be done with our time here. But Proverbs 1 says, hear my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. That the vision that we're trying to leave our kids is to put a graceful garland on their head and pendants on their neck. We're trying to dress them up with honor and purpose for their life. That's what we are seeking to do. And then from a vision standpoint, the way that we do that, it's 2 coins. And I use the image of a coin because there's a heads and a tails to each of these. So the 2 sides of these coins would be What the first coin would be, what we talk about here at Genesis, message and model. Message and model. That we actually, part of being a parent is that we instruct and we teach our kids, hear my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. The joke I say is, people say, oh, my kids teach me more than I teach them. It's like, no, that's bad parenting. That's bad parenting. God might be teaching you through your kids a ton, but you have a job to teach your kids. Like that is from a framework standpoint in your home. Like, and as we think about kids ministry too, I think this also applies. Like we are teaching, instructing, we are passing along information and knowledge about how this world works and what to expect and how to live in it so that they can live and walk wisely. So we need to have that framework. I am called to instruct my kids. Within that is the idea of model, right? To get to a model. Where's my proverb on that? My Proverbs 23:26. My son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. Or Proverbs 14:26. In the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. That your kids actually have a refuge within your own hope in God. That as you're walking that out, they are living under the banner of your own faith, and they're getting to test and see the faithfulness of God through your faith. Through your faith, they are getting to see that at work. I won't tell the story about you and Sam, the dog. I'll tell that one later if you just want to know a funny story about Crista saying bad words. Because when we model, it's modeling our faith, but it's also modeling our failure. That in each of those places we're pointing to Jesus. Right? Because that's how we model. It's message and model, both success and failure. And Crista has a funny story there. Okay. Second coin, and then I'll throw it to you, babe, for what this looks like, is discipline and celebration. It's two sides of the same coin. So message and model, it's the same thing. That's the instruction piece. And then discipline and celebration. So, it's Proverbs all about discipline. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far away from him. Like there's a foolishness, and by foolishness, I mean that in just a very dictionary definition, literal. Kids do not understand the world, and we need to help them see that. And so discipline is boundary setting, it's consequence for behavior, it's order and life of a home, it's corrective and truth oriented. Because children, as they grow up in our homes and in our churches, we ought to have the expectation that they will misbehave, that they will sin, that they will wander. And if you expect that to happen, you are actually preparing your heart. You're not shocked, you're not overwhelmed, and you're helping correct and walk and discipline them in the way. And so discipline is not the space to just angry or whatever. I told Josiah over here, is a teenager in our church. He got a kick out of this. You might be physical discipline with a young one to sit there and say, for us, we're not going to go crazy, but we do a lot of taps on the hand to help correct behavior. A lot hey, no, because we're trying to just set boundaries for them for how our world works. And my joke, as I said, you could do that with a little kid. If you are doing physical discipline on a teenager, that's not discipline, that's a fight. So that's for you, Josiah. So there's discipline. Here's Brett Landry, he's a pastor in Vancouver. He says, undisciplined children grow up to be foolish adults, and the consequences of foolishness in adulthood are much more painful than being disciplined by loving parents. And so we have this expectation that we need to bring discipline into our life and even into our ministry. But our discipline is because we delight in them. Proverbs 3, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, because the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father, the son in whom he delights. And the other side of the coin of discipline is celebration. That we want to restore, we want to celebrate and honor and rejoice as our kids are walking in life with Jesus. We tell our children we love them. They don't need to wonder, right? Okay, so Crista, that was just kind of some vision of just we want to leave a blessing for our kids. We're recognizing this is something the Lord needs to establish. We're trying to walk in these things and let his joy shape the joy of our home. Let me throw it to you to practical. What are some categories, some things that, as we just have kind of tried to process parenting, by no means perfectly, what are some categories and some practicals that we've kind of like pressed into?
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple things, but as we do Q&A, we want to hear, you can help us dig into more stuff, but for the sake of time, I'll kind of be broad. One thing that we do in our home to the message and model thing is we really celebrate confession in our home. And so whenever one of our kids does something wrong, there is this understanding in our home that if you confess your sin, you will be met with grace by mom and dad. And so when my 4-year-old hits their brother, and it's, that look on their face when they know they did it, they know they did it, but they're not going to tell you. And it's like, hey, if you tell mommy the truth, telling the truth is always the best choice. And telling the truth, you always get grace and forgiveness. But if we lie, there are bigger consequences for lying. And so we always celebrate confession in our home. So when our kids tell the truth, no matter how bad the sin is that they did, whatever picture was drawn on the wall or whatever, slap in the face, it is, I am so proud of you for choosing to tell the truth and to confess your sin. That is what followers of Jesus do. I'm so proud of you. Now you're going to help me wash the wall because you drew on it, but I'm very proud of you for choosing to tell the truth. And when our kids lie, that is a big deal. We do not hide our sin. We do not hide our sin. You hide your sin, the sin is going to grow. We are not deceptive. We are truth tellers. We confess our sin because Jesus always forgives. When you ask for forgiveness, you will always be forgiven. And so that's a little bit of how we want to celebrate our kids, even in their sin, is we want them to, because when they're adults, if my son has a porn addiction, or my daughter is just off in the weeds of whatever sins that they're into, I want them to know if they confess, they will always find grace and forgiveness. I want them to know they can always come to our home, but they could always come home to their Heavenly Father. And so we want to model that for our kids. Celebrating confession is big in our home. Yeah.
And then with that, what could you share? We want to give kids language. We talked about giving them gospel language and a gospel framework for understanding. I think that's something that you've done just really well with our kids. You want to share kind of like what that's looked like?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of the gospel, and I'm a big fan of,
Good. All right, so
I'm a big fan of the gospel, and I'm a big fan of just like practical handles for people, even for our small kids. And so about 2 years ago, I taught the kids the gospel. I said, okay, this week we're going to talk about creation. And so we read about, the gospel is creation, fall, redemption, restoration. So I was like, hey, we're talking about creation. So we read of the Bible about creation, talked about what is the world like in Eden? What was it, and we just did imagination. Okay, draw a picture of what Eden would have been like. My son drew a picture of Spider-Man swinging in the Garden of Eden. I was like, yeah, that's great. Everything's wonderful, whatever. And we just walked through that. But then we talked through, they have this framework now of, okay, God created a good world. Everything was right. But because of sin, everything is broken. But Jesus is hope, even in the midst of sin. And one day, God will make everything new, right? They know this framework. And so they have this framework. And so we don't want to shelter our kids from the world. And we want to help them know how to apply the gospel to the real world. And so as things have come up, and it has come up at our dinner table, Mom, why doesn't she have a dad? Where is her dad? Well, babe, remember the creation? Do you think she would have a dad in the Garden of Eden? If we lived in Eden, would she still have a daddy? Yeah. Well, because of the fall, baby, daddies make bad choices and they leave. But what is the hope for your friend? What can we pray for? That she would know Jesus. That's right, because Jesus is our hope. And so it's when they have these questions about life, my kids already have this framework of the gospel. And so as things come up, we're able as parents then just to help reinforce that language of what in a perfect world, what would that look like, baby? And how is Jesus the hope for that? Let's pray into that and hope that for your friend or for you in that situation.
Yeah. Last thing on this topic, we're going to move to church stuff. I want to throw out to you. How do we like we're raising up our kids, right, in our home, but they have their own faith journey. And so how do we kind of balance that sort of like, here's how we operate in our home and setting the boundaries, kind of setting the tone, a culture, while also kind of giving space, understanding. I mean, I'm just thinking about different kids. They all have different personalities and different relationships with God. So does that make sense? Like, how do we say, hey, here's who we are, here's how we operate, we're walking this way, while also the same giving some freedom for them to process as individuals?
Yeah. So I think the hardest thing I've had to learn as a mom, funny enough, but is that my kids are sinners. And I know they're sinners, but that they're not Christian. And so my kids are not Christians. They haven't put their faith in Jesus yet. One of them has, 4 of them haven't. They're young still. They're on their faith journey. And so when they sin, or when I see things come up in them, one, as a parent, my gut reaction is like panic mode, like, oh my gosh, like I can't have a kid who's like lying all the time. Like, what is this going to look like? But then I'm like, well, you're 4 and I lie sometimes still. Like, God is still working on me, and you're not even a believer yet. Like, you're still a sinful little 4-year-old, like, who hasn't found Jesus. So
if you haven't caught on, our 4-year-old sins a lot.
Our 4-year-old is hard. Yeah. But, and so there is this understanding where I have to know Jesus will save my kids in his time. And they have to go through, I think of my own life. I had to live my own life and go through my own journey of where I knew I needed the grace of Jesus. And I'm there for my kids for that journey and to help guide them and coach them through that journey. But I cannot force Jesus on them. I'm not going to put the Christian title on them until they have put their faith in Jesus. And I love biographies. Mm-hmm. And I recently read a biography on Susanna Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon's wife, and it just tells the story where she homeschooled her 2 boys, and she would sing hymns with them at the piano. And her boys wrote about her after she passed away and said, I remember Mom would sing this hymn with us, and when it got to this one verse about how we would put our faith in Jesus and he made us clean, she would stop playing and she was saying, now I'm going to sing this on my own voice, but one day when you put your faith in Jesus, you'll get to sing it with me. And she would make them stop and she would sing it. And her son remembered how he longed to sing that with his mom, but knowing that he had not put his faith in Jesus yet. But the joy he had the one day when he was able to sing that refrain with his mother. And so we acknowledge our kids don't know Jesus, but we want to create a hunger and a thirst for them. And so in our home, we create a culture of, we follow Jesus. This is what life with Jesus looks like. It is beautiful. It is good. It is the best way to live. And this is what we want for you. And we want to create a thirst and a hunger for them.
Yeah. And I think the way really, really practically in our own home, and I'm going to share just a little bit, I know it's being recorded, but just for, hey, Dana, this is just for here in this room, because I'm going to share just a little bit about our kids specifically, and that they have their own stories. So like our oldest, it was kind of easy in terms of, it was hard. So it was, she has doubts, she has questions, she has would say just straight up, I don't believe, which is really hard as a parent to hear. And then she had this experience over the last 6 months or so where God worked in her heart and she came in tears with joy in her face, just kind of like, I believe in Jesus. And it's like, oh, that's amazing and beautiful. We baptized her this past Sunday. It was like, and we know, just like, it's beautiful. Our middle 2, we talk about, they're not Christians yet. It's just this kind of tender thing of like, how are we fostering faith? Because they would both say, I love Jesus. I'm following. And it's like, we want to affirm that in them and help them see it. Well, also, like my son was like, we were talking about baptism. He's like, I want to get baptized and I want to be a ninja. And like, for whatever reason, like those 2 things were always like never one without the other. That like those, I don't know how those were linked in his mind, but they just were. And just saying, yeah, just being like, that is just saying, hey, that's a beautiful desire, son. I want to baptize you. I want you, but just kind of like, hey, I'm trying to help navigate and I'm trying to root his faith. And so it is a difficult thing. And I think it's okay to leave our kids hungry at some level as they're growing up in home, trusting God's work of salvation in their life and his timing. And so there are things like, we don't, like our kids don't take communion with us. That's that, and our oldest now will. And it's saying, hey, no, this is for us as we practice faith in Jesus, as we're walking with. It's like helping them see that life there.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like there's more to say on that.
Yeah, so much
I'm
more.
sensitive of time, but ask questions more on that piece. I think there's more to say. But the biggest thing I would say is, that's always in my heart, is Jesus said, do not hinder the children from coming. Let the children come to me. And every kid, no matter how small they are people, and they are already living their own faith journey. And so as parents and as ministry workers and in churches, as a church family, we're there for that journey, to help support them, to help point them to Jesus, to point them to the gospel, and to let the Holy Spirit do its work in them.
Yeah. Okay, moving kind of to like the church, just a little vision. I'll be shorter on this. I have one verse. As we think about kids in our church, here's Psalm 45. This is also our family. They overlap. Psalm 45, verse 16. In place of your fathers shall be your sons. I love that verse. In place of your fathers shall be your sons. And what that just tells me is, I read that verse and it's like, I am a baton passer. That's what it means to be a father, is to say, in the place of my father is going to be my son. In the place of my mother is going to be my daughter. My goal is to help bring them into that place. I don't exist for myself and my sake. Like there's a passing on to that same parental love piece. And I would just encourage us from just a vision standpoint, as we think about kids ministry and children's ministries in our churches, and even just our ministries as a church in general, is to build younger. To build younger. Not as a means of, hey, let's be hip and reach the next generation or whatever. I just think like when we plant, I know when we planted a church, there was like a 2 to 3 year vision towards like sustainability and can we get some of these things going off the ground. And now that I've been in the game 8 years, I'm like, oh, people should plant with a 10 to 20 year vision of how can we raise sons and daughters into maturity. I love having been able to walk with the Genesis crew from seeing kind of this, I'm not on the ground with you guys, but seeing Genesis like from the church. From day one, and seeing kind of like a lot of you guys came to Genesis when you were like early 20s, even teens, and now like, getting a little older. And it's like, oh yeah, the maturity and the life that's growing in there. I have a personal vision of like, what would it look like to plant a church where your target audience, in terms of who you were trying to reach out to, was like 14-year-olds. And how would that you wouldn't be sustainable from my financial standpoint, like at all. But like just that you wouldn't have a 2 or 3 sustainability window, but what would it look like to have a 10, 20 year sustainability window and just say, we're going to go reach lost 14-year-olds. We're going to disciple the heck out of them. We're going to empower them to preach and lead worship and to pray. And it's going to be the ugliest, messiest, weird stuff. And there's going to be so many emotions. But we're going to raise them into maturity. And that's how we're going to reach and plant a church. How would that think and have it process differently? And so for us, as we're leading churches, I guess it's from a higher level, not just the practicals of leading a kids ministry, but how do we see like people under the age of 20, under the age of 18 even, as like, yeah, this is who we're building around, not just who we're taking care of while we minister here, or who we're trying to reach for the sake of actually, that we're always kind of using kids to reach other people. That's a kind of strategy. It's like, let's reach kids so we can reach their parents. Yes, I mean, that's not bad. We want to reach the parents, but what about like reaching kids to reach kids? Like that we actually care about their souls. And that's even part of our church strategy, is toward that end. So Crista, what are some practicals in our home and in church kind of like living that out?
Yeah, so I mean, just a couple quick bullet points on that is that, again, kids are people and they are going to grow up to be adults. And so we put so much time and energy into discipling and raising up leaders, community group leaders, church planters, elders. But our kids are the future church planters, leaders, elders of our churches. And so they require our intentionality and our devotion. And so children's ministry is not a service to parents so that they can enjoy whatever's happening in the main gathering. Children's ministry is ministering to children. That's what it is. because they are people for whom Christ has died, and they have a story that they are going to live out, and they are the future of our church. And we love them because they are significant and they are important, and God loves them. And so with that is just in kids ministry, it's not just about the content that you teach, like the stories, those are important, the stories, the gospel, making sure they understand. But I think the biggest thing is knowing that our kids understand what the culture of a church is, that they are a part of a bigger family, that they are a part of the bigger mission of God. We want to encourage our kids to be participants of prayer. We want our kids to be participants of giving. Every year on our anniversary, we've copied Anthem. We give generously on our birthday. We have giving buckets in the kids' rooms because we want them to know they're a part of this church. They're a part of giving. And we want our kids to know that they're a part of the mission. Invite your friends to church. Kids are so much more bold than grown-ups are. And if we challenge them while they're young, give them the taste for evangelism and mission, this is what we do. This is what followers of Jesus do. It's like, okay, sweet, I'll do it. Come to church. They're so bold. And so it's more the culture we're creating for them, how they understand themselves as a part of the whole body of Christ, more than just whatever story or lesson you're teaching.
Yeah. And so kind of last thing on that, and then we can kind of go to some Q&A, is when we think children's ministry, and listen, some of you guys have better children's ministries than we do, so we'll beg and borrow and steal in terms of your policies, programs, procedures, and all that. This is more just like on a vision level. What are we trying to get at is, like you said, children's ministry is not what are we doing for the parents, it's ministry to children. And so we are kind of building into our kids is actually at some level the same thing we would do for adults. It's not actually, it might look a little different and take some different shapes, but it's the same essentials, both in like some doctrinal content that we want them to learn and grow up and know, but even like you're saying, the culture, the expectation, what we're bringing them into, that we want children to see, yeah, this is my family, like community life. And we can maybe even brainstorm together. How do we do that? Just this very simple framework. We could be more complex than this, but we want our people to pray, serve, go, grow, right? I mean, how do we have our kids pray? And I know you do that really well with our kids specifically, family-wise. We pray with our kids for the gathering, not just for our sick puppy, but we pray for the gathering as we drive to church every morning. We have like elementary kids in our church are serving on serve teams. So when you come, like it's going to be a third grader that hands you a cup of coffee and washing the chairs because we meet outside. So they, are the ones helping put out the cards and washing the chairs. It's like, that's kind of the reality that's going there. You already mentioned gift. And then the evangelism part of that is, our kids are bold evangelists. I mean, I was just blown away by Chloe and her desire. Was it there was like,
oh my goodness. So I'm a very introvert mom, and I'm super introverted, but Chloe's first week of kindergarten, our oldest, it's the first week. We're walking home from school, and she turns to her friend from class who's walking towards, like down the street towards her. She's like, hey, you want to come over to my house? And I was like, I can't. I'm like, what? And then the mom's like, oh, if it's okay with your mom. And I was like, sure. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't cleaned. And then as we're walking to the house, Chloe says, hey, do you want to come to our community group? It's tonight. And I was like, yes, it is tonight. And then Chloe's like, do you go to church, by the way? Because we have a church. And I'm like, okay, Chloe. Like, I have raised you better than I am.
Yeah. And that was a couple that had some Christian background, but no real faith. They were living together, not married. That was 4 years ago. They're in our church. They're married. They're walking with Jesus. They help and serve. They're like growing in their faith. And that's Chloe, dude, just being like, just that boldness that's there. And I think as we reach kids, I think of, bullet point, but like, again, not just for just reaching their parents, but for reaching them. I think of, I told this story 2 years ago at Genesis Collective. I think of Amanda at your dad's church, who dad was in jail, and they reached her as a 4-year-old in a park outreach, and they were just ministering to her. She wasn't bringing any value to the church. She wasn't tithing. She wasn't serving. And they had to pick her up. Everything like for the church was for her. It was like a cost. And not that it's like, it's too clean of a story at one level, but at one point through this one girl, like 30, 40 people in the church were from her. Because as she grew up in that church, she was inviting her brothers and sisters and cousins, and then the web kind of grew because they cared to reach this 4-year-old fatherless girl, and said, "Boom." I think of Elaine in our church. She was 80, and she's this, and she's lived a rough life. And when she was in 4th grade, her neighbor just said, "Come to church with me." That's been her like that's the marked change of her whole family was a fellow 4th grader invited her over. I think of your grandma that you shared about. Opposite story where a kid wasn't taken care of, and then the church didn't stand in the gap for kids, and the destruction that led to a life, and not just her life, but generations that have fallen from that. And I think of my own story. I'm here, my brother's here. Hey, Tori, that's my sister-in-law right there. Put her on the spot. Me, my brother, or my 2 brothers, like real brief, like our family fell apart when we were in junior high, and our church also fell apart. And we were just kind of like out there wandering, and the church began to experience some revitalization, and they connected to us. They reached out to us and just brought me and my brothers into the fold and into this beautiful revitalization thing. And it's like, not to be like all like, look at us, but like I planted a church. My brother's a church planter in Japan. My older brother's on an elder track in Visalia at the church he's at. And people will ask my parents, like, what did you guys do? And we just kind of like laugh a little bit, like they loved us, but there was no discipleship in our home. There was a church that loved us and pursued us and cared for us. And so that's just like the great power, I think, that's in that.
That's good. Yeah, I think we'd love to open to questions on anything family, church ministry. I think we have about 20 to 25 minutes for Q&A. So we just love to hit wherever you guys are at and what you want to
we
kind of dig
super
into.
Specific.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I truly don't think this is a helpful question. I'm just really curious how you guys function in a 2-bedroom house and what that's like, and if your kids like it, and also how old your kids are, so like what that dynamic is.
That's great. Yeah. How do we function in a 2-bedroom house?
We do have an unpermitted like half den thing that our boy was sleeping in, and then
but he got scared.
He got scared. No, he got sick, little. And we had one humidifier. Right, so they were all in the room with a humidifier, and then they got better, and we're like, all right, Jack, let's go back. And he's like, can I stay? So that was like 2-3 years ago, though. Yeah. So it's been a minute.
Yeah. So our kids are 9, 8, 7, 4, and 3. Our son is the 8-year-old. So all 5 kids sleep in one bedroom. We have 2 bunk beds and a toddler bed in one room. And it's the only life that they've known. So they're just like, yeah, this is how it is, Although our oldest would love her own space. She does talk. She's old enough now to where she's like, can I have space? So their bed is their sacred space because there's no other, everything else is shared. No. But that's just kind of how it is, They figured out how to all sleep together. No matter how loud one kid is screaming or crying, somehow the others just sleep right through it. They just figured out how to make it work. And we've just learned to live with less things. I throw away toys all the time.
All the time.
Because I just can't handle clutter and
so many toys.
And they don't need it. So yeah, we just kind of make it work, and we are content with what God's given us, and we have a beautiful home.
Yeah, a couple of lessons I think that we've learned on that, just really like practically, especially if you're like a first-time parent or you're thinking about being a parent, like kids are resilient. Now, obviously, we want to be tender with them. We want to like nurture them, but there's actually a resiliency that kids have, and even just like you're saying, like being able to sleep through noise, like man, that was tough. That actually took a little bit of training, but it happened. It's not ideal, but it's worked out. And the other thing, and this comes from being a part of the Genesis Collective, something that's been sown into us. So maybe now we're kind of in this place to help sow into you guys. Is part of parenting is bringing kids into the adventure, bringing kids into the cost and sacrifice of ministry and mission. I think it was Chris Vinon who said at one point that gave us great courage for our 2-bedroom house of just being like, yeah, there's a blessing of being like forced together. It's a lot tougher in some ways. And yet also I think there's going to be some blessing and fruit from it that shared life. And if we had the ability to get a bigger space, I think we would. But we're not like, what was it, the quote that Terry shared from Elizabeth Elliot? Like, we want Christ to form us here, not just us in a different set of circumstances. Christ can meet us in our 2-bedroom home.
Yeah. And I love our kids fight often.
All the time.
But they really are genuine good friends.
Yeah.
And I love that they don't have doors to shut on one another, that they are just forced to figure out how to work out their differences and how to come back together at the end of the day. And so it is sweet. But it would be nice to have a bigger home, but it is sweet. Like God has blessed us in it. So, yeah.
If it's on this side, I'll go get it, Krista. I got you.
This might be a pretty complex question, and so answer however. But I was just kind of thinking just about like our kids aren't Christians yet; they're not believers, and so and I was just thinking like also of the call of like an elder, and like to have your house in line, and like that's a disqualification. And so that was just like something that went through my mind. So I don't know.
So is your question kind of like, should I be an elder? That's what I heard. I wasn't sure. Yeah. Why are you
kid's
talking?
Not a Christian. What are you doing up here?
Do elders have to have
believing children?
Yeah. So just real quick, if you're kind of like 1 Timothy 3.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
That's where you're. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 1 Timothy 3, he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his household, how will he care for God's church? There is a correlation between the home and the church. Like, and that even as we're talking about home versus kids ministry, I was like, well, there's a lot of overlap there anyway. So in terms of that, I mean, I think and there's a couple articles and on the more complex, like, hey, how do we get at this? I think the picture that is asked is like, hey, even from 1 Timothy 3, I think, does it say in Titus, believing children? I think, because I just picked 1 Timothy, but the idea of managing a household well, keeping order, keeping the dignity, like walking your children in the patterns of Christ. Like, is there a healthy home that's how you would how you lead your home is how you're going to lead the church. And so pretty much like that's the idea there. There's some more, I could send you like some academic articles in a sense, like kind of arguing at some of that level. Go ahead. I'm like complex. You're so simple and beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say kind of the heart behind that understanding of my kids aren't Christians yet is one for you as a parent when you would panic or freak out as you see just sin come up. But it's also helpful for your children to help draw the line for them of this is something that you have to decide. It's not something that you're born into. Just because you're mom and dad's kids and we lead a church and we go to church, it doesn't mean that you're automatically a follower of Jesus. Like you need to decide what to do with Jesus for yourself. And so that kind of helps draw that line for our kids. But as an elder and a leader, part of that is managing your household, keeping it in order. You are our children and you are in our household. And we follow Jesus as a family. And so in our house, we use that language all the time. We're different. We're different than the world because we follow Jesus. In our home, we don't play video games for 4 hours a day. In our home, kids don't get phones. We follow Jesus. We believe that creation is important. We believe that, like we help set those guidelines for them.
It's a little bit more of a complex conversation.
It's more complex, but it's just,
a nuance, I should say.
Yeah, we're followers of Jesus, so we're going to start the morning with our Bible, and that's what we do. And one day when you love Jesus and you choose to follow him, we want you to do this when you're older. And it's modeling and creating those patterns of life so that they can see and taste what following Jesus is like. We go to church together. That's what we do. I know you don't want to, but you're in our home and this is what we do. And when you're older and you're out of our home, you can choose what you want to do with Jesus. And so I think that's part of creating the culture in our home. Yeah. Is that helpful? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go.
All right, you spoke gospel truth to kids. We got to hear an example of that. I'm thinking of the heart of a parent plagued with insecurity and guilt. Mom guilt is real. Give us example of gospel truth
Oh
for
man, I
parental
got one.
hearts.
I'm going to set you up real quick, but Krista, you're going to run with this. We do this training with our church of kind of a gospel framework for everything. And that question is literally one of the things that Krista does every time, is even going down to potty, like what does the gospel have to say to potty training? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So
This is from our class we do.
This is my life. We were potty training one of our children, and they would not go in the toilet. They would pee in the toilet. I'm sorry, guys. This is just parenting. They would pee in the toilet. They wouldn't poop in the toilet. They just keep pooping their pants. And I was just getting angry. I was like, what is wrong with you? You know what you're doing. And just how dare you? How dare you poop in your pants? How, how many pairs of underwear I have to wash? I was just like, oh my goodness. And it wasn't even accident. It was just apathy. It was just I don't want to, and it's just dude, get your act together, kid. I was just so mad. And then I found that as the weeks went by and the kid still wasn't getting it, that I started to feel what is wrong with me? Why can't my kid learn how to go to the bathroom? I'm a better mother than this. I am intentional. I am disciplined. I got the chart. This kid is reflecting poorly on me as a parent. And I just felt all this frustration. I was literally losing sleep at night because of potty training. And for this particular child, it took months to potty train. I think almost 9 months. We would start, wouldn't work, stop, start. It was just ridiculous. And I remember laying in bed one night and I couldn't sleep and I was just crying, and it just feels silly. But I was so frustrated and angry, and I stopped and I thought, Lord, what does the gospel have to say about potty training? I'm we say the gospel has something to say about everything. I'm does it have anything to say about this? And so I sat there and I thought, okay, Lord, in creation, maybe my son would use the toilet.
Oh, you just ratted him out.
Poor Jack.
Yeah. You did a good job saying one of our kids until just now.
All right, Lord, in creation, this would be easy. They would not be so apathetic. In creation, I wouldn't be so angry. I would be patient. I would be kind. I hate how angry I'm getting at my son right now. In creation, I would know that you are walking with me, and my identity wouldn't be so tied to my kid's performance right now. But because of the fall, my son is apathetic. I am angry. I'm taking this personally. Lord, I know that in Jesus, I have hope that one day my kid will use the toilet. And whether it's now, sometime between now and 30, it's going to happen, and I will be there for that moment. And it's going to be glorious. And right now, Jesus, will you be enough for me? Will you remind me that my identity is not tied to his performance? Would you help me to love him like you love me, and to be gracious and to be patient? And God, help me to show him the future hope of glory that we have in you. And I just laid in bed and I just walked through this. And it feels ridiculous because of what it was, but I was so tormented in my soul. And but that's what parenting is that when you see your kids do something, you feel like it reflects on you, and you just are indignant at them for exposing.
And even if it does reflect on you, I mean, that's where it's my identity is so secure in Christ, or that Jesus covers my shame, that because there are moments where it reflects. You see yourself in your kids and you're like, I'm a terrible person. And Jesus died for me. He loves me. He covers my shame, and he's empowering me to walk in a new way. So let's do that together. Yeah.
Man, kids are like parrots too. They say things that you say, and then you're like, oh, I see.
My favorite is my kid goes, my back hurts.
Yeah, that's me.
I have a tendency, I feel like I'm not naturally good with kids. I have a tendency to overcomplicate interacting with kids. And I think just recently getting a little bit more involved with the kids ministry and the wide range, because we don't have, everyone just goes to the same place. So I think the question is and I think you guys have 9, 8, 7, 4, 3, and they all play together, I'm assuming. So I guess, what does it look like to be playful and interactive with kids in a simple manner? How do you, I don't know, I feel like I have a hard time connecting with kids now because I'm out of that season of my life. And it just seems awkward to me sometimes. I'm just like, I don't know what to say to you.
Yeah.
So what does it look like to interact well and for them to feel like seen and cared for, but also like you're a friend to them?
Yeah. So, Chris, I'm sure you'll throw in some stuff on this. First of all, SNL has a great skit on Duolingo for talking to kids. So if you want to look that one up, just how to talk to a kid. But I think what we just said, Krista said earlier, like kids are people. So don't be afraid to like just ask them questions. Like asking questions is a big part. Like let them share. You don't need to feel like, what do I say to them? Like ask them questions, hear from them. Just take what they say seriously and ask them further questions like you would in a conversation. And then don't feel like I need to, like keep the convo going necessarily. It's just like, yeah, I could talk to a kid and let that be what that's going to be. I think, and Chris, you might have more practical stuff on some things, but I think for us, one thing we've talked about with our kids, and we have a young church too, one of the blessings that we just praise God for is that there is a generation between us and our kids that are following Jesus with intentionality and purpose. And just there's your presence in a kid's life, even if you're like, I'm not exactly sure how to talk to you. Just like that presence, maybe an individual conversation, you're like, I don't know what to do here. High five. Like, that might be awkward, but your consistent presence over years speaks volumes to them. And it helps them grow up in a community where their understanding of life and where faith is not just my parents. It helps. It's the fancy word is the social imaginary that they are walking in. The way that they understand the world includes faith at every level and people that they can talk to and walk with. And just for us as parents, it's a gift to have people in their 20s who are following Jesus, who are in our home, who are with our kids, speaking or not, playing or not, but following Jesus. That is a gift to those kids to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell young women in our church often that when my girls are teenagers, they might not come to me with their problems, but they might come to you. And I'm glad that you're here and a part of this church because I trust your relationship with Jesus. So to what DJ said, just loving Jesus passionately, like kids watch you and see that. But I think practically for kids, one thing these are very small, but I don't know, they're just very practical. One thing is get down at their eye level. So when you talk to a kid, don't stand and talk to them. Like if you get down at their level and just like, hey, how are you? I'm so glad you're here. Like that is a big deal to get at their eye level when you speak to them. And then observe what a kid is doing. If there's a girl coloring in your class or at the thing, like, hey, do you mind if I color next to you? And just like color next to them, get your own picture and start drawing. Oh, what are you drawing? What do you want to see my color? Like, show the picture. Tell me about what you're drawing and tell them about what you're drawing. If a kid is playing tag, hey, can I play with you? Like, see what they're already doing and just invite yourself into that space. Don't feel like you have to be the one orchestrating the moment. But if you notice them talking, giggling, playing ball, hey, can I play with you? If you show that you can just engage with what they're already doing, what they're already interested in, I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah. There are two problems with kids. One, getting them to talk, and then the second is once you get them to talk, getting them to stop talking. Okay, maybe, yeah. Tori, you had a question too? Okay, two questions, and then I actually want to throw, just to close, I'm going to throw the mic to Edwin just for a quick minute. Yeah.
This is my second question, but this is a real question. This is to the homeschooling vibe, because our kids ministry, we have one room essentially. So right now the ages of our kids are like probably max like 7, but it's going all the way down to like 6 months old. So I think it sounds like you're teaching all of your kids at the same time. It sounds like you're telling the gospel story to all of your kids. And we're kind of working on introducing curriculum. Like for a little while, it was like, okay, it's just going to be chaos. And what we're going to focus on is culture more than anything else. We're going to focus on family. But now we're like, okay, they're old enough to like engage. But like, how do we do that? We have a 2-year-old here and a 4-year-old here and a 9-year-old here, like whatever. So I'm curious, like how you're telling these stories, how you're teaching with like not always separate spaces, and how you're keeping different age levels engaged in what you're doing, and all that. I know that's like complicated, but the practical reality of multiple age level education.
That's good. Do you want me to do that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Any tips? No. No, I think that there's a couple of things on that is just, if you have that wide range, one is I engage my older kids to help teach the youngers. And so it's, in homeschooling, it's, hey, Chloe, oldest, you know the ABCs. Go with Mercy and help her find everything that starts with the letter A. And so if there's a way that you could use that 7-year-old, even if it's, hey, help me pass out these papers, help me collect the crayons. Like, you're a part of leading this, and you're helping us disciple these toddlers. And so inviting the older kids into the space of helping with that. And then also to alleviate the pressure. Honestly, like a 2-year-old doesn't retain that much. And so sometimes it's like, hey, it's okay if they're just playing with Play-Doh right now while we tell this story, and the older kids who can focus are focusing. And then when we all talk about it, or we, draw a picture, or we're doing whatever, like, then we're all going to do it together. And this kid might just know Jesus loves me. And it's like, that is so great. Like, isn't it amazing that Jesus loves me? Whereas this kid knows Jesus loves me despite my sin, and da-da-da. And it's like, so there's kind of, we're telling the same story, but kind of you have to, if you can engage the olders to help the youngers, and then give yourself grace if those younger kids, as you're honing in on something really strong and important for that lesson or that moment, it's okay to let the littles be distracted for a minute so you could focus in on those who are really engaged. Is that helpful? Yes. It's good. We could also talk after through a lot more questions. I'm going to pass it to Tori.
Yeah, Tori.
Yeah, this is just to the you're talking about inviting your kids into the sacrifice and mission of following Jesus and being a family in ministry. But yeah, one of my things that my brain goes to a lot is the pastor's kids and MKs that grow up to like hate God because my parents didn't care about me, or my parents only cared about God and the mission, and so I don't want anything to do with him because he took my parents. I know there's a big journey in between those two types of experiences, but I just advice on how to balance. We make some decisions, prioritizing your kids and showing the Father's love to them, and also inviting them into the sacrifice and mission of following Jesus, and discerning wisdom in between those.
Yeah. Crista, you can share just a couple thoughts that immediately come to my mind. I think, well, the phrase that first came to my mind, this is something that we've been talking about, is our kids get our best time, not our only time. And so it's like, then that's actually why we're homeschooling. That was the kind of heart behind our decision making, was that our kids were getting our second and third best time. We were sacrificing them for mission, and they were only getting our second, third best. And we said, no, we want them to have, especially Crista, like her best time. And you guys this morning got Krista's second best, or, you guys got the, hey, I'm going to get up early and put some notes together for here, but they're going to get the disciplined, regular, like they get the best time. But it did come at some sacrifice. Kids woke up. Where's mom? She's at Starbucks right now. She's working. She's, like that's like a little sacrifice. The second thing I think is in everything, this is like my biggest thing I've learned in parenting, in ministry, is like intentionality. Like, we speak into what we're doing. So we don't just make our kids bear the cost. We tell them, hey, you know what I mean? And we're helping frame this story that they're living into, and saying, hey, like, we follow Jesus. Jesus is here's what Jesus has done in our life. And now we get to go. Would you pray with me as Daddy goes to Lebanon? And we're going to go for this. We're going to be gone, but we're going to get to see it. I'm going to come back with stories. And that's going to help like shape some of those moments. And I think the third thing is like, your kids should never be confused that you love them. That should never be like a question or a doubt in their mind. And I think, Matt, for you and I, you weren't here, but I just shared about some of the difficulty of our home and how our parents didn't really disciple us and raise us up. The one thing I would give my parents credit for and say, like, no, we grew up, we knew we were loved. That was never like questioned, I think, in our home. And so I think within a pastoral or a ministry home, like, man, like your kids need to know that you love them. So what would you add, Ben?
Yeah, I think the other thing two things I would add to that. One is that's why for our home, it was modeled for me from my dad, was just like, we're doing this together. This is a family thing. It's not dad's thing. And so ministry doesn't take dad away, and it doesn't take mom and dad away, but this is something we do as a family. So sometimes it does mean we're apart, like mom's at Starbucks, but it means we were along for the adventure. Our kids are here this week, or, we go to church. We all go to church early together because we are all serving together. It's not just one of us. Or when I was a kid, my dad is a track person. He hands out tracts. So I carried my dad's tracts, and I would hold his water bottle. And as he passed them out, I would give him the next one. And, we did it together because it wasn't just his thing. This is our thing. This is what Jesus has called us to, not just dad to. And then the second thing is establishing regular rhythms of family time.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
That is an anchor for your kids. So every Friday we Sabbath. 24 hours on Friday are completely for Jesus and for our kids. We don't see anybody and we do nothing, but our kids know every Friday they get 100% mom and dad. That is us. So we might be busy and crazy, but they know that there's that anchor where mom and dad, they know that that's coming. And I think that helps to establish security, safety, and and consistent, just those consistent patterns, I think, are huge.
Yeah.
To know that they're prioritized.
Sure. Well, hey, I want to bring us to a close because there's so much content, information, and like all craziness in terms of we're tired probably, and we have free time. Chris and I are totally available. Matt, if you have more questions, you want to, and honestly, I know you guys specifically, I'm going to guess Chris wanted us to share very truthfully for Genesis, because you guys are probably trying to navigate some church planting spaces. Yeah, I think that's probably the sub thing there. So if you need specifically you, but anyone have more questions, family, kids, we're available to that. I want to invite Edwin. Edwin, you come up here just real briefly, man. Just be mindful that people want to get on break, but Edwin leads our youth. And Edwin, can you share just like real briefly, like what you do with Compass, and kind of like your heart and what you're trying to get there. Because I think if you have questions on teenagers and like, what does that look like? Come talk to Edwin. I just want to kind of introduce people to you.
Yeah, absolutely. We run a student outreach ministry, and we go into the public schools and just share the gospel, open up questions to students that don't know about the faith, or just questions about just Christianity, the Bible, or God. And we just open it up for students from different backgrounds, whether, some students have two moms or different religions. And yeah, it's just an open space for that. And we cast a big net, and then we eventually just share the gospel with them as they come regularly. We take them out into the community and say, hey, we want to serve with you. We invite our church. Hey, there's some students that want to serve, and we get community projects. We collab with the community, and then eventually invite them to our church, and then they get to our church. And every year we've been doing it for 5 years, but the past 3 years we've been getting a good group, and we've been baptizing kids by the end of school year. And it's been a joy just being able to see kids come to faith and get baptized and get plugged into our church and bless their families. Yeah, absolutely. So Edwin's a champ. I mean, on all four of our public public middle schools in Downey, he runs this club called Compass, which is you go to the administration, you say it's a faith and leadership thing. And it is, in terms of like you're teaching kids leadership principles around serving and things like that. But it's also like, you don't tell the administration this, but it's pretty boldly evangelistic in terms of like, hey, like the content of that club is like, hey, what are your questions? I mean, I know I've been with you. That's a lot of what you do. It's just, hey, what are your questions? You just take those questions and you answer them and you bring them to Jesus. And then we're going to go serve the community. We're going to be here, and you're active and you're engaging those students. And so we have you are pastoring a couple hundred middle school students in our city that aren't connected to our church. But there is that's that idea of it's like, hey, how do we pursue and build around that? Every year, like you said, there's cool stories of that. So I just wanted to, I know you could share so much more, but I wanted to introduce you to kind of people that care about kids and youth, to sit there and say, hey, Edwin is a guy to talk to because he's a resource of at least creative ideas and energy, and like he's doing some really cool stuff. So I wanted to put him before you. So thank you, Edwin. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for your time. Edwin is around. We'll be around, but also God bless you.